Let's talk about S&ex and attachment. Leslie Wells, connection coach here. I help individuals heal, thrive, improve, repair, and connect more deeply in their romantic relationships by looking at things through an attachment lens. If you have seen any of my other videos, I once made a video of a dismissive avoidant and how they show up in the bedroom. And this is actually going to speak to the complete opposite, and I'll tell you why. This is very unusual for the dismissive avoidant because usually they are extremely predictable based on their attachment style. So this is one area where they can throw us a curveball. So we're going to talk today specifically about the dismissive avoidant. So if you're unfamiliar, go back and watch some of my other TikToks. The dismissive avoidant is someone who grew up with emotional neglect or a lack of emotional attunement and nurturing when they were a child. And so there's three things that typically really trigger them relationships. That is like closeness, intimacy, commitment, expectations. And there's some other things too. Conflict is another one of them. So they show up really well in the beginning of a relationship, and then they switch it up and show up very badly as the relationship becomes more invested. And there's actually those things that I talked about when there's actual expectations and conflict, because conflict comes up when you're in a serious invested relationship. And whenever there is intimacy, which requires vulnerability and transparency. So when it comes to the bedroom, which usually requires vulnerability, sometimes they can show up really well in the bedroom and actually connect and tend to connect more in that way. For dismissive avoidants who really struggle with emotional intimacy, which is a big trigger for them, they can often be more vulnerable in the bedroom because they can sort of separate their mind and their body in that way, and so they can show up more vulnerably. Dismissive avoidants are extremely good at compartmentalizing and distracting, disassociating, and compartmentalizing, and so sometimes they can actually kind of take the feelings away from it and connect better and more deeply in the bedroom. So a lot of times dismissive avoidance will not give you emotional attunement or emotionally pour into the relationship, but they do tend to want S&ex way more often. It's easier for them to connect that way. And the opposite can also be true. For some dismissive avoidants who actually view S&ex as a form of intimacy and are therefore triggered by that intimacy because it feels too vulnerable, the exact opposite could happen, where you could have a relationship with a dismissive avoidant where there is a really big lack of S&ex. And sometimes we actually see more of the dismissive avoidants that struggle with ED than other attachment styles, because it requires so much vulnerability that it triggers them to such an extent that they can't show up. So what really matters here for the DA and how they show up in S&ex, and whether or not it's something that they connect more deeply with or not, is their view on it, how it requires them to show up vulnerably, the actual emotional intimacy that's required. It really is their perception of the amount of intimacy and vulnerability, and whether or not they can show up more often and better in that way, or if it's something that they tend to use to connect with more or less. A lot of times we see a lot of the dismissive avoidants who do struggle to show up in this way, to be more connected S&exually, that also have a corn addiction. And that is because there is no trigger from a pseudo woman or a counterfeit woman that can reject you, or you're not required to show up with true vulnerability and emotional intimacy. And we already know that dismissive avoidants are really good at disassociating through distraction and through shutting their emotions down and through suppression. And corn addiction is a way that many people use. It's another outlet that people use to be able to shut down, suppress, emotionally numb, and withdraw. In my coaching practice, I deal a lot with S&ex that comes up in coaching, and that can be something that a lot of couples struggle with, and it comes up a lot for dismissive avoidant couples. And it's just a shame. I mean, it's a God-given gift. It is a gift that God gave us that is a seal to our covenant, and it was meant to be used, and to be used often. And even though it might sound a little different, it's actually a really big way, if you're a Christian, for you to glorify God. So it's really important for a healthy marriage for you to be having a lot of S&ex. So if your attachment style is hindering you from enjoying the sexual life that you deserve, then reach out to me for coaching. This is something that I work with coaching, and we hit it from an attachment standpoint as well. So here's to having better S&ex.